You there, you don't happen to know why Gaunts Ghosts are called ghosts, do you? Nah mate, ain't it 'cause they're proper sneaky like? Yeah, that's probably it. Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and you can probably tell by the thumbnail and title of this video that I'm having a little fun with this one, because I've been making Gaunts Ghosts models, that being an Imperial Guard regiment nicknamed Ghosts, and I also happen to have some Nighthaunt Ghosts, and I think I might make it a little bit of a conversion. So let's have a closer look at what I'm talking about. So these are the Nighthaunt Chainrasps, one of the infantry choices for the Nighthaunt army in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Amethyst Quill acquired these for me on the cover of Forgotten Realms magazine some time ago, but I have no intention of making a Nighthaunt army. What I was after was simply some ghosts. I like to have a collection of models of all sorts of random things, so that when something pops up in a game, I have something close enough to represent them. Necromancer raising skeletons? Got 'em. The spirit protecting the swamp? Right here. Someone channeling Ed 209? I got several options. But what I didn't have was ghosts. And the usual bedsheet ghost is just a little not quite what I want. The Chainrasps really do look good, and for less than £1 of model at the time, a good deal to boot. So which one should I choose to make a Tanith ghost? Because I really need to push this pun. Given the general poses of the models, I feel I can convert one of the hand weapons into the straight silver war knife, but the other, open hand, might actually be holding a las rifle in some way. I have some Cadian and Catachan las rifles laying around, neither of which match the fancy new Gaunts Ghost las rifles that I still don't have yet. At the time of recording, they're not even out yet. But the Catachan style, known as the Galaxy pattern to nerds like me, was the same pattern used in the old pewter Tanith models, so I'll use that type. I'm leaning towards using this particular Chainrasp, as I can place the las rifle in its hand as if it's holding it just around the receiver, and it will fit and it will also look good for the pose. But just giving it a las rifle isn't quite enough for me. To really hammer home the ghost pun, maybe this ghost is a ghost because their las rifle failed at some point. Possibly it overloaded or it was hit by enemy fire. And so I'm going to wreck this utterly tiny piece of plastic to tell that part of a story. So here I'm using a branded rotary tool. It has often been said that I'm rather good with this type of tool for the sole reason that I understand heat dissipation. Whenever you use any type of drill, the contact between what you're cutting and the tool will create a great amount of heat. Usually when cutting, you really need to minimize that and deal with it somehow so that your parts don't melt or get damaged outside of your intended cut. But here I'm trying something different. I'm deliberately heating up the bit on a scrap of sprue so that I can melt into the las gun. What this will do is hopefully give me some gnarly texture around where my cut is, lumpy, bubbly, craggy shapes. Now it came out a little more subtly than I had hoped for, so I went a little further by cutting away the top bar, which is either a scope or a carrier handle depending on which bit of the lore you're tripping over at the time. And I didn't much like the gap that it left, so I found the scrap of plastic, bent it and glued it back on, as if the explosion had forced it outwards and fractured the metal. And that just hit the spot right, pardon another pun, to make the las rifle look how I wanted it to. Next step to model is the war knife, and again I'm bouncing between these two models. One of them has the better blade to shorten into the straight silver, but putting a las gun into its hand will fill the framing of the pose The other had a far better pose, particularly for holding the lass, but with a sword that looks much less like the straight silver. Well, I have my overly well organised bits box to the rescue. Rather than cutting the sword in half, which wouldn't necessarily look quite right, I went through all of the blades in my bits box and I found this, a Frostgrave short sword. Frostgrave models are slightly closer to true scale than Games Workshop offerings, so this short sword will look pretty much like a knife on the Chainrasp. That said, the straight silver is basically a short sword, so it's fine. And with that simple conversion work done, I can get on to painting, which is surprisingly quick. As these models were intended to represent ghosts in random roleplay games, I only base coated them previously. I had intended to eventually someday maybe get round to giving them a few highlights, or some glow effect, or something, but I haven't done it yet. What that means for this model is all I really have to do is exactly that, add in some details and some highlights. I started by adding a highly saturated green for the recesses of this lower section, as well as using a white highlight colour. I had originally base coated this area with a pale light green, so hopefully this mix of colours will give that ethereal look. And as I had that white and some brown from another model on my wet palette, I layered up the skull from its original just brown base coat into some white highlights, and this is a technique I've shown before for skulls. The top section, obviously, got very nearly the exact same camo recipe that I've been using for all of my other Tanith models, but this time, instead of my rich light green as the highlight, I'm using the pale bluey green as the highlight instead. Once the camo pattern is then painted over the top, I'm hoping that that will give just a slightly different effect so that it looks right next to the other Tanith models, but it also looks wrong. And of course the camo pattern itself is very much the same as my previous models, so it will certainly fit in the lineup. And then I just need to fill out the colours in the overloaded las gun, which mostly got the bog standard colours, with some silver and black in the blown out area, and that's the model done. I have taken this pun to its logical conclusion, or, as I prefer to say, just far enough. And so there we finally have the pun model, the ghostly Gaunts Ghost, complete. I have put this model alongside some of the other Gaunts Ghost models, and I think it actually fits in a little too nicely. The kind of ghostly lower section, the light green and white, is quite visible, but other than that, it really fits in surprisingly well. This is legit to use in any game, so I don't have to worry about that either. This model, as much of a joke as it is going in my army for certain. I'm not going to leave this one out. But if you want to post in the comment how terrible my pun is and how I've wasted all this time on a silly joke, the comment section is down below. There's also a description box on your way past. There's a whole bunch of links to some other stuff that I get up to. Thank you all very much for watching. I'm ED-SKaR, and I always will be.